At 20, Mason Hale inherited the only property nobody wanted, an abandoned Victorian house standing alone at the edge of Blackstone Ridge. His older brother inherited the family timber company. His sister inherited the investment portfolio. Every acre of productive land had already been divided before the lawyer unfolded the final page. "Mason," he said quietly, "your grandfather left you Hawthorne House." Silence filled the room. Then someone laughed. His uncle leaned back in his chair. "The haunted wreck?" His brother smirked. "It'll cost more to tear down than it's worth." His sister shrugged. "At least you'll have a roof." Everyone believed Grandpa Henry had made one last mistake. Mason wasn't so sure. Henry Hale had built one of the largest logging companies in the county. He never acted without a reason. If he'd protected that abandoned house until the day he died, it mattered. 3 days later, Mason loaded his backpack into his aging pickup and drove toward Blackstone Ridge. The house appeared through towering pines just before sunset. It was magnificent. 3 stories of weathered gray wood. Stone chimneys climbed above a slate roof covered in moss. Broken stained glass windows reflected the fading light. A wraparound porch sagged in several places, but the stone foundation looked remarkably solid. Nature had reclaimed the gardens. Wild roses climbed cracked fountains. Ancient oak trees shaded the property. Mason stepped onto the porch. The old front door creaked open with surprising ease. Inside, dust covered everything, yet nothing had been looted. Furniture still stood where it had been placed decades earlier. Oil paintings lined the walls. An enormous grandfather clock waited silently in the entrance hall. The library remained filled with leather-bound books. The dining room table was still set with silver candlesticks. It felt less abandoned, and more as though someone had simply walked away. That night, Mason slept beside the massive stone fireplace. Rain tapped gently against the windows. For the first time since his grandfather's funeral, he felt strangely peaceful. The next morning, he began restoring the house. He repaired broken porch boards, cleared fallen branches, boarded shattered windows, patched leaks in the roof. Every afternoon after working at a nearby lumber yard, he returned to Hawthorne House. Week by week, the forgotten mansion slowly awakened. One Saturday, an elderly woman climbed the porch carrying homemade bread. "My name's Eleanor. You must be Mason." He smiled. "You knew Grandpa?" She nodded warmly. "I was the town librarian. We were friends for nearly 50 years. She slowly walked through the house. Running her fingers across the restored banister, she smiled. "You polish wood exactly the way Henry did." Mason laughed. "He taught me." She stopped outside a narrow hallway. There used to be another staircase. He looked confused. "I've searched everywhere." "No." She gently touched the wall. He sealed it himself. "Where did it go?" "Down. To the cellar?" She nodded. "But not the wine cellar everyone knew about. There was another?" Eleanor smiled. "Henry once told me, some doors should only open after a house is loved again." Those words stayed with Mason. Months passed. Neighbors noticed the remarkable transformation. The gardens bloomed again. Fresh paint brightened the porch. Lights glowed through windows that had been dark for decades. People began stopping simply to admire the restoration. Then something unusual happened. A real estate developer arrived unexpectedly. "My name is Richard Sloan." He looked around carefully. "We'd like to purchase the property." Mason smiled politely. "It's not for sale. We'll offer $5 million. Mason blinked. "For this house?" "Cash." "No." Richard remained calm. "If you reconsider." He handed over a business card. "Please call." The following week, another buyer appeared. Then another. Each offered more than the last. $7 million. $9 million. $11 million. Every conversation ended exactly the same way. Each buyer casually asked, "Has anyone opened the old cellar?" Mason always answered, "I've only found the regular basement." Each visitor smiled politely, then left. Now he knew. The house itself wasn't what they wanted. Late one evening, Mason returned to the entrance hall. The enormous grandfather clock caught his attention. It hadn't worked in decades. Yet, its base extended several inches farther into the floor than seemed necessary. Curious, he carefully moved the clock away from the wall. Hidden beneath it was an iron ring set into polished oak flooring. His pulse quickened. He lifted it. A square wooden hatch slowly opened. Cold air drifted upward. Stone steps disappeared into darkness. So that's the missing staircase. Lantern in hand, Mason descended. The staircase didn't lead to the known basement. Instead, it continued far deeper beneath the house. Eventually, it opened into an astonishing underground chamber. Not a storage cellar, not a wine vault, an enormous architectural archive. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound journals, rolled blueprints, historic land surveys, timber engineering plans, scale models of bridges, mills, and entire towns. Beautiful drafting tables stood exactly as they had decades earlier. At the center rested one polished walnut desk. A single envelope lay waiting. Across the front, written in Grandpa Henry's unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words. For Mason only. His hands shook. He carefully opened it. The first sentence stole his breath. If you're reading this, then you restored Hawthorne House before asking what was hidden beneath it. A smile spread across his face. You knew. He continued reading. The cellar isn't your inheritance. Before he could read another line, a deep metallic bell echoed through the chamber. Once, twice, 3 times. Then every light inside the underground archive slowly flickered to life. At the same moment, Mason heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy door opening somewhere else beneath the house. A door he hadn't seen. The metallic bell echoed one final time. Silence returned. Then warm amber lights illuminated the underground archive 1 row at a time. Mason slowly looked around. Someone had designed the system to activate automatically. The heavy door continued opening. Hidden behind one wall of blueprints stood another room. He carried the lantern inside. Unlike the archive, this chamber contained no shelves. Instead, beautifully crafted wooden models filled the room. Entire towns, covered bridges, schools, libraries, parks, water towers. Every model bore Grandpa Henry's signature. At the center stood a glass display case. Inside rested another letter, opened after the first. Mason unfolded it. The archive isn't your inheritance. He laughed softly. You already told me that. The next line answered his question. Neither is this workshop. Mason frowned. If neither room was the inheritance, what had Grandpa actually left him? He kept reading. 40 years earlier, Henry Hale had become one of the state's most respected structural designers. Although people knew him as a successful timber businessman, very few knew his real passion. He designed affordable wooden buildings for struggling rural communities, schools, medical clinics, libraries, town halls. He refused to patent many of his ideas because he wanted small towns to use them freely. Instead, he quietly created the Hawthorne Foundation. Architects, engineers, and builders voluntarily improved his designs over decades. Every updated blueprint, every structural calculation, every engineering improvement, every legal agreement, every land donation, everything had been preserved beneath Hawthorne House. Not to hide wealth, to protect a mission. Mason opened another cabinet. Thousands of architectural plans were organized by purpose. Emergency housing, flood-resistant homes, earthquake-resistant schools, low-cost hospitals, community workshops. Each design had been tested, revised, and improved over many years. A recent financial statement rested beneath the files. The Hawthorne Foundation. Current endowment, $329 million. Mason quietly lowered the document. $329 million. Not because of hidden treasure. Because the foundation owned licensing rights for specialized commercial timber construction methods, while donating residential designs free of charge. The royalties had grown for decades. Henry's letter continued. The foundation transfers only to the person who restores Hawthorne House before discovering what lies beneath it. Mason smiled. Without realizing it, he had already fulfilled the only condition. He repaired the house because he loved his grandfather, not because he expected anything. Another envelope rested beneath the financial report. Smaller, addressed simply. My grandson. Mason opened it carefully. When everyone laughed at the house. I hoped you wouldn't. He smiled. I never did. The letter continued. People admire finished buildings. Few admire the years of work before the first brick is laid. You've always been different. Mason continued reading. When you were 12, you spent an entire summer repairing birdhouses after a storm. You said every creature deserved a roof. That was the day I chose you. His eyes filled with tears. Henry wrote one final memory. Do you remember asking why I never tore this old house down? Mason nodded to himself. He remembered. Henry had answered. Strong foundations deserve second chances. The final paragraph read, Don't build monuments. Build opportunities. If your work helps someone stand again, it will outlive every fortune. A familiar voice echoed from the archive entrance. Mason, it was Eleanor. She slowly entered carrying an old wooden box. I suppose you found everything. You knew about this? She smiled. Only enough to know I wasn't supposed to open it. She placed the box on the drafting table. Henry left this with me, to give you only after the archive awakened. Inside rested hundreds of letters. Each came from towns across the country. One thanked Henry for designing a school after a tornado. Another came from a doctor whose rural clinic had saved countless lives. Another described families surviving floods because of elevated house plans Henry had shared free of charge. None mentioned money. Every letter thanked him for giving ordinary people a chance to rebuild. Eleanor quietly wiped away a tear. Your grandfather measured success differently. Weeks later, attorney Claire Donovan arrived. Every document proved authentic. The Hawthorne Foundation legally belonged to Mason. Its commercial licensing agreements continued generating substantial income every year. Reporters assumed he would sell everything. Instead, Mason surprised them. Hawthorne House reopened. Not as a private mansion, not as a luxury museum. It became the Hawthorne Design Institute. Architecture students studied sustainable construction. Retired carpenters taught apprentices traditional woodworking. Engineers volunteered to improve affordable housing designs. Communities affected by floods, fires, and storms received complete building plans free of charge. Exactly as Henry intended. The underground archive became one of the largest collections of rural architectural history in the state. Visitors traveled hundreds of miles to study it. Meanwhile, Hawthorne House remained alive. Its gardens flourished again. Children explored the restored library. Neighbors gathered on the wide front porch every Saturday evening. It no longer felt abandoned. It felt needed. Months later, Mason's brother visited. He stood silently inside the grand entrance hall. I thought Grandpa left you an old house. Mason smiled. He did. His brother looked confused. Then what changed? I opened the right door. Years later, every new student entering the institute stopped beside the restored grandfather clock. It still stood exactly where Henry left it. Behind it remained the hidden hatch. Mason never moved it again. Instead, he placed a small bronze plaque beside the clock. It read, "Some doors only open after a house is loved again." Most people believed Mason became wealthy because he opened a locked cellar beneath an abandoned house. That wasn't the real story. The cellar wasn't the treasure. The underground archive wasn't the treasure. Even the $329 million foundation wasn't the greatest inheritance. Henry Hale left his grandson something far more valuable. The patience to restore instead of replace. The vision to build opportunities instead of monuments. And the understanding that the strongest houses are not remembered for what they protect. They're remembered for the lives they help rebuild. For the young man who had been laughed at for claiming an abandoned house, the locked cellar didn't reveal hidden riches. It revealed the purpose his grandfather had quietly been building beneath his feet all along.